In Dodge City, Kansas, in 1880, our guest today is Serge, the new arrival. The setting is Dodge City, famous for its Wild West, which is widely depicted in popular culture with constant gunfights, thugs, and sheriffs fighting crime on a daily basis. However, in reality, the first thing Sheriff Test sees from his office window is a huge sign prohibiting the carrying of firearms in the city. This Wild West stereotype is important knowledge. At the time, the U.S. was known for its tough laws. Today, Americans may take pride in the freedom and right to own guns enshrined in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. But in the Wild West, firearms were heavily regulated in much of the U.S. Often, gun owners had to turn them in when they entered the city at a hotel or local law enforcement agency, as law and order was strictly enforced. Our guest, being the sheriff, is naturally part of it, and his office is in the county courthouse. These majestic limestone buildings still adorn the entire territory of the United States. In the area of the Wild West, they sprang up like mushrooms because the county courts were as important as the railroad stations. The former provided trade, while the latter maintained order. Residents of entire districts came together to finance the construction of courts and administrative buildings. Our Sheriff Test works in one of these buildings, and his day will probably start with sorting a huge amount of papers in his usual office. Basically, these papers are related to taxes, court decisions, and public opinion. Since the office of sheriff was elective, our test needed to be a good politician for whom the people voted. In the history of the United States, there are many cases when worthy sheriffs left office and their place was taken by criminals and ignorant people simply because they knew how to manipulate public opinion. That's why our test needs to keep up with current events and also pay attention to his popularity among the people, even if this does not earn him additional payment. His salary covers only part of his work, while most of his efforts go unnoticed and are behind bars in the next room. Usually the sheriff kept a small jail next to his office. However, it was not so often thugs who got there, but thieves and tax evaders. The collection of taxes became almost the main work of our test, since each sheriff was also a tax collector in the county. Top leaders paid great attention to this aspect. The bandits could rob as many taverns as they wanted, but the taxes had to go to the treasury regularly. Sheriff Test probably spent most of his day poring over papers related to matters such as the condition of the ranch, the amount of money, debtors, the state of the business, and the movement of cattle from the neighboring village. He also wondered if they should pay more taxes. He had to draw up an efficient route in order to collect taxes most efficiently. It's safe to say that in the Wild West, the sheriff was, for the most part, busy with such matters. In addition to the above, it may be recalled that the district courts make decisions that the sheriff is required to comply with. For example, he can evict people, impose fines on hotels, etc. However, all this is devoid of romance, especially considering that the area of jurisdiction of the sheriff covers the entire county. Movies where every village has its own sheriff do not accurately reflect reality. In fact, in the days of the Wild West, the county could be so large that physically there was not enough time for the sheriff to be present in every village. In such cases, marshals came to the rescue, representing the law in the field. When you see a tiny town in a movie or game that supposedly has its own sheriff, it's most likely a marshal who enforces law and order and takes criminals into custody. Our Sheriff Test's job is most likely to come and arrest such a criminal, taking him to the county jail. Often our test delegates some of its powers to the marshal in the field and instructs him to execute court decisions or collect taxes. It is easy to guess that this approach sometimes becomes a problem when corrupt marshals begin to steal or exceed their authority. An example of such a situation is the town of Tombstone, where local marshals Virgil and Orby with assistants entered into a firefight with bandits, seeking to ensure law and order. However, County Sheriff John B. Kahn did not like this approach and had the marshals arrested for abuse of authority. The sheriff himself rarely turned to arms. For example, there are cases when African-American Sheriff Bass Reeves arrested 3,000 people during his service and shot 14 dead. However, there were those who almost never used weapons in their entire careers. After all, the position of the sheriff in the Wild West, as you already understood, is mainly related to administrative work. If the sheriff did carry a weapon, then most likely it was in a holster on the front of the belt, since the weapon does not like unnecessary shaking, and this was well understood in the Wild West. Revolvers were not very reliable, so sheriffs often preferred conventional double-barreled shotguns. For example, Virgil Earp boasted that he had a loaded gun hidden in almost every bar. There's a good chance our sheriff test will be in the county court's office all day sorting for paperwork. However, what happens if the peaceful routine is disrupted by a sudden attack of bandits? In this case, our test will resort to a law that is still in force in the United States and allows the sheriff to recruit civilians to maintain order. This is perhaps the most powerful weapon in the hands of any sheriff. The history of its use began with the fact that the U.S. authorities banned the use of the army to suppress civil conflicts. It's really sad that sheriffs, marshals, and other law enforcement officers were scattered across the vast territories of the Wild West, and in the event of an organized gang attack, they were outnumbered. Therefore, if an attack on Dodge City occurs, our test will take advantage of the law and recruit civilians to form a squad. Often such detachments entered into battle with the robbers. A striking example is the war in Lincoln County, where Gangster Billy the Kid's detachment was opposed by a detachment of civilians assembled by Sheriff William Brady. However, in this case, the conflict began as a showdown between businessmen, and the guilty party in it was not clearly identified. There were other sad examples where the detachments formed by the sheriffs turned into a legalized mafia. However, most of all, there were positive examples when armed civilian detachments helped maintain order in the city. Here we are confronted with another myth, which claims that the attacks of the Indians often caused the disorder. This is also a consequence of the influence of cinema. In fact, the Indians did not pose a threat, not even to the sheriffs, but to the settlers who crossed the country for 20 years of the mid-19th century. During this time, the Indians killed only 362 migrants throughout the country, and the Indians themselves were killed 426. These figures do not speak of any full-scale war. As for the earnings of our test as a sheriff, this is, of course, a varying figure. The salaries of sheriffs and marshals varied greatly depending on the territory. After all, most of the income of our test depends on the collection of taxes, and their amount depends on the number of profitable businesses, railway stations, etc. In addition, the number of arrests also directly affected the salary. For example, in Texas, a marshal was paid $2 extra for paperwork, $4 for an arrest, and 5 cents for every mile traveled while on the job. The same Virgil Earp, being a marshal, received about $150 a month, plus a percentage of taxes and fines. Our test, an honest guy, gets about $200 a month in total. This is an excellent salary considering that the average factory worker in 1880 was making about $45 over the same time period. Renting a small apartment costs $5 a month. 12 eggs cost 11 cents. A pound of fresh pork or 10 kilograms of potatoes cost 10 cents a pound. Tea from Japan cost 64 cents, which was almost a month's salary for our sheriff. For this amount, he could buy about 180 kilograms of boneless beef and 250 kilograms of rice. If our sheriff decides to rent not a small apartment, but a house, then you can find records of 4-room cabins in Kansas for $12 a month. In general, we can say that the salary was quite sufficient. Moreover, do not forget about possible kickbacks and deductions, which obviously took place. Our test was also able to purchase industrial volumes of the latest models of weapons. For example, the famous 1876 Winchester model cost $32 in the store, while prices for regular double-barreled shotguns started at $7. A good horse could be purchased for $50 and land for about $2 an acre. In other words, to buy 1 square kilometer of land, our test would have to invest about 2 monthly salaries, which is not much. Here it will be much more interesting to sort out prices for a simple hard worker who works at a factory for $30 a month. For example, he will have to work for about 2 years to acquire 1 square kilometer of land, even uncultivated and wild. However, our sheriff test can handle such expenses. However, again, Do not forget that such joy does not last forever. Sheriff elections could be either scheduled or unforeseen, and there could always be a candidate who would remove Testa and lure the people's votes to his side. In conclusion, it should be noted that the so-called Wild West was quite a short time by historical standards. Many believe that the Wild West stretched for about 100 years, from the beginning of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, although some scholars even put its duration at 30 years. The Wild West is a period when, under the influence of the gold rush and the search for a place to live, people from the east coast of the United States, immigrants, moved to the west and actively colonized the territories that are now the central and western states of the country. Although conflicts, skirmishes, and showdowns happened, the law quickly came to new territories. If you count, then the Wild West in terms of murders was almost more civilized than the present.